Ladies and gentlemen, let us now please welcome our guest of honor and today's keynote speaker. He's the editor-at-large of Die Zeit, Dr. Theo Sommer.
Dear participants of the World Universities Debating Championship, dear friends and masters of debating and oratory, dear guests, there is a sound Anglo-Saxon rule for public speakers. Get up, speak up, shut up. Elizabeth Taylor, who got married 8 times, twice to Richard Burton, used to put it a little differently. Each time she simply told her new husband, "I won't keep you long. I shall not keep you longer than 15 minutes. What I want to do, I want to congratulate the organizers of the World Universities Debating Championship in Berlin on the splendid job they've done. I will reminisce a bit about my own debating past, and I shall put before you a few thoughts on why I think that debating is more than just a sport. It is the essence of democracy, the most civilized way to argue out differences and to wage a conflict without coming to blows or taking to arms. As Winston Churchill used to put it, jaw is better than war. 62 years ago, I was a student at a small college in the American Midwest, Manchester College in Indiana. There I learned to wear jeans, to drive a car, to navigate a tractor through the cornfields, but more importantly, I was introduced to debating. I took up public speaking and radio speech, and in those classes we didn't only learn how to structure and deliver a speech, and how to put rhetorical devices such as analogy, onomatopoeia, or synlepsis to good use. We also studied great speeches of world history, Pericles' funeral oration, Cicero's Quousque tandem Catilinam, Mark Antony's condemnation of Brutus, Caesar's killer, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, Roosevelt's "We have nothing to fear but fear itself," and we even analyzed Joseph Goebbels' inflammatory harangue, "Wollt ihr den totalen Krieg?" Do you want total war? And before long I joined the varsity debate squad of Manchester College. Most every weekend we traveled for a debating tournament to some Midwestern college, Oberlin, Purdue, Carnegie Tech. I still cherish very fond memories of the Michigan Girls College in Kalamazoo. Half a year after North Korea had attacked South Korea, and in the face of Moscow's stolid refusal to allow the United Nations to take defensive action, the topic debated by all US varsity squads was resolved that the non-communist nations should form a new world organization. Another subject was, what role should the federal government play in providing for the welfare of its people? That's a question obviously no less topical today than it was in 1951. Our squad, by the way, did very well. My own rhetorical career in America reached its zenith at a national speech contest held at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I came off second with a speech, "You Can't Double-Cross Germany." In it, I sharply criticized the inconsistency of our Western allies who on the one hand still went on dismantling German industry, while on the other hand, ever more insistently demanding the rearmament of the Bonn Republic. Debating was a great and formative experience for me, and I have ever since practiced it with glee, whether in editorial board meetings at Die Zeit, the weekly paper whose editor-in-chief and publisher I was for 3 decades, or on public panels, or in TV talk shows. And I was hooked immediately when in the year 2000 a small platoon of students approached us and asked whether our paper would support them in their undertaking to introduce varsity debating at German universities. And my enthusiasm convinced both Die Zeit and the Zeit Foundation to back the students' effort. And ever since, these 2 institutions have been generous sponsors of the WUDC. The 5 Zeit debates annually, a tournament series leading up to the German championship, have become an outstanding feature of the debating landscape in this country. And I can assure you that we shall gladly continue our support. We do not do this only for trite business reasons. Of course, we value our association with university debating as a bridge to Germany's academic youth. No other German quality paper has a higher number of readers among students. But our motives for supporting your worthy enterprise transcend mere mercantile considerations. Die Zeit has always seen itself as the great forum of the nation. Our late founder, Gerd Bucerius, was a past master in the art of incisive and astute peroration. And the paper we put together once a week is to a large extent the product of heated argumentation, ultimately the result of judiciously weighing pros and cons. And in the same vein, we feel that in the last analysis, democracy means government by discussion. As an academically trained historian, I know that the rhetoric teachers and orators of the ancient world shared this view. They valued eloquence not merely as l'art pour l'art. Its purpose, Cicero said, and I quote him, was to promote public debate and guide state leaders. Orators, added Quintilian, should see to it, another quote, that the law triumphs over lawlessness and truth prevails over falsehood. They should influence the Senate's deliberations and lead the masses, if they've gone astray, back to noble aims. The speaker then is a vir civilis, a citizen who cares for the polity, who wants to shape it and move it in the right direction, who is intent on redressing undesirable developments and correcting erroneous or pernicious policies. The vis persuandi, the capacity to persuade and convince, was the basic objective already of ancient oratory, which required, of course, the gift to research the facts and to present them in a way that would allay doubts, dispel misgivings, and overcome objections. According to Quintilian, a powerful voice was also imperative. It should not sound like, quote, the voice of eunuchs, women, and sick people. Now today, we would certainly tend to consider this statement politically incorrect. Likewise, his recipe for keeping a strong voice, long walks, ointments, light food, and sexual abstinence is somewhat behind the curve. Anyway, I'm quite sure that all the voices you have heard during the past 9 days were strong voices that did not require the exertions and deprivations recommended by Quintilian. Now, in my remaining 3 minutes, it remains to me to express my admiration and gratitude to the WUDC, the German Varsity Association, for their achievements in the past 12 years. I do so as its honorary president, a title they conferred upon me in 2004, purportedly for my role as midwife and protagonist of intercollegiate debating in Germany. Die Zeit and the Zeitstiftung are proud of what you have accomplished in just a little over a decade. When your representatives first came to me in 2000 or 2001, there were only 14 debating clubs at German universities, and some of those clubs didn't have more than 2 or 3 members. In 2006, the number was 43, and now the count is more than 80. You've branded out enormously. You extended your membership to Austria, Switzerland, to Italy's South Tyrol. You've become a significant factor in the European champion process, and you have now hosted and organized the first World University Debating Championship in Germany, the world's largest debating tournament. I understand it was a great success, an event which the 1,400 participants from 18 countries will remember for a long time. Your sponsors and media partners owe you a world of gratitude for your accomplishment, and we wish you continued luck and success in your endeavors. Speaking for Zeit and Zeitstiftung, I have been empowered to confirm that you will find us at your side in the future as well. If you allow me one aside, I would simply like to point out that I was a bit put off when I clicked your website, vdch.de. What came up first was the Verband Deutscher Heilandkattelzüchter. And what came up second was the Verband Deutscher Haarchirurgen. I don't really know what you can do about that, but I think that an institution that could take its clue from Bach's choral heart and mouth and beat and life, you deserve a less bovine and less hairy digital access. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I promised you I would abide by Elizabeth Taylor's warning to her husbands, I won't keep you long. Peter Ustinov once gave speakers the following advice: you need a brilliant beginning, a brilliant end, and as little as possible in between. You will have noticed that I spared you the brilliant beginning, and I would also like to skip the brilliant end, so you can right away move to the applause. I know that 90% of the applause only reflects the relief of the audience that it's finally over. Thank you anyway, and over to the grand final.
Thank you very much to Dr. Theo Sommer. Now, we're really excited to have so many members of the general public here. I'm less excited about the fact that he just stole my line about debating being more than just a sport, but that's okay. I'll just skip that slide. Now, anyway, I want to shortly tell you what happened before. It all started on December 27th, about 9 days ago, when 1,200 debaters from all over the world, from 82 countries, arrived here in Berlin. Since then, we've had 9 preliminary rounds where teams debated against each other in kind of like a league system. From there on, the best teams broke into octafinals, then quarterfinals, then semifinals, and today, now, finally, the real finals. So you're going to see the best 4 teams in the category of English as a second language speakers. Now, not only do they have to perform today, you have a job too. What we want from you is to decide the best speaker from your point of view of this final. And you have your brochure there on your seat, you have been on your seat, and we'll use that later to decide to vote upon the best speaker. So you have to think during the debates, who is the most convincing. Now, don't just vote then for the person you agree with the most, because, there's nothing you can do about if you agree with him or not from the beginning. Now, think about who would persuade you the most if you had no opinion already formed on whatever the topic of that debate is going to be. Now, before we get started, there are also other juries, not just you. There are 2 more. First, we have an honorary jury. Sorry. The honorary jury to date for this ESL final is made up of Mario Brock, Professor of Neurosurgery and recipient of the Federal Cross of Merit. Also in our honorary jury is our keynote speaker you just heard, Dr. Theo Sommer. Then we have Katja Nordhaus. She's a teacher, and she's the recipient of the German Teacher Award. We have the representative from the Romanian embassy, Vlad Vasili. And finally, there's Niels Schröter, the chairman of the Berlin Debating Union, the organizer of this tournament. Hello, Niels. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm now ready to call in the 4 teams that made it into the ESL final of Worlds 2012. We have, in opening government, Leiden A. We then have another Dutch team, actually another team from Leiden in opening opposition, Leiden C. In closing government, we have a team that had to travel a little bit longer. We have BRAC, Bangladesh A. And finally, in closing opposition, you will see RRISA from Israel. Now, finally, I'm going to hand over the floor and the microphone to the chair of the adjudication panel of the ESL final, Mr. Dan Cochran.
I'd like to call this House to order. Judging with me today on the judging panel will be Ewan McDonald-Russell, Ben Wilgar, Fred Cowell, Jonathan Meader-Maynard, Kate Falkenstein, Norman Carroll, Tasmin Elias, and Michael Bear. Standing orders remain as they have throughout the tournament. Speeches will be 7 minutes in length, with one bang or clap at 1 minute and another at 6 minutes to indicate the beginning and the end of so-called unprotected time, when points of information may be offered from the other side. A double bang at 7 minutes will indicate the end of the speaker's speech. And the motion, which the 4 teams have been called to debate for this year's ESL World Championships final is, this House believes that representative democracies with large numbers of foreigners living in their territory on a temporary or permanent basis should create specific seats to represent them in Parliament. Best wishes to all 4 teams, and if there are no questions regarding the standing orders, I'd like to welcome the Prime Minister to open the debate that stands in his name. Here we are.
Mr. Speaker, we think the biggest benefit of this policy is that given how many time our local people spend in countries like Scotland, like Ireland, like even Australia and Canada, we would probably have representatives pretty much everywhere, and thanks for that. We think the concept of a nation state in the 1900s was pretty solid. You get a vote where you were born and where you died. And that was pretty solid because at that point in time, you could probably really not move anywhere else because it took a day to travel. But in the common day world, a world that's increasingly globalized, and where people work all across the world, we think we need a new opportunity system to actually guarantee fair representation and to deal with contemporary challenges towards people living across the world. The model line is going to give you today is as follows. We think that people who are migrants, who have been working for either a temporary or on a longer day, the people refugees get opt in to the political system. They get specially represented seats, and the number of seats will be determined by the proportion of that population given the proportion of population in the entire country. We think also we will create one seat allocated for those migrants who don't have a larger population to buy in our model. We think that still all the policies that will give you actual vote in general national elections once of those criteria have applied within the country they're living, but also still apply to them so they can still go on that. If there's clarification taken out in closing.
All right, so are you going to do the seats by ethnic population or by the place they work, or how are you going to do it?
By the country they're from. That was easy. I also have it written down, so you just wait for PY. I'm going to talk about 2 things. Firstly, why do you think representation is legitimate, or why the state has to do this? And secondly, why do you think we receive many privileged with migrants in these countries, and why in the alternative we think it was worse off not only for these migrants, but for the country as a whole? So firstly, why is representation legitimate? The first thing we tell you is the reason why the state represents you is not the state is an artificial construct, but a construct that may be beneficial to you. Because the state, because it's kind of arbitrarily all right, and the benefits that accrue from that shouldn't also be based on arbitrary measures. So you opt into a system where you can move from country to country, and we think that therefore the state provides you. Because the reason the state is there is not because you were born in that place, but because actively we consider all of us that there are certain benefits to having the state. We think that all should count for these people. And moreover, we think that the state has an important duty towards you because it influences you in many ways. The state does it in 2 ways. Firstly, by having a direct monopoly of power, and secondly, by the fact that they have a legal framework which means other actors within that state can work against you in certain ways. That means that those states have a duty to provide a good living to you because they directly influence your decisions. Just as I have a duty to make choices that directly influence people for a way that may be beneficial to them. In the way that we think the state are currently in this sense, we say actually let you opt into a system where they can work in the country, and therefore if actively allows you opt in to that state, the only thing that means that you have a state benefit. We already recognise this in the status quo, given that for migrants, some avenues already available to enter this process. We think, however, it would be better if we all votes. I'm going to talk about that right now. So, firstly, one of the major problems we see within many of these groups is that often there's lack of access to genuinely state protection, or often ways that can guarantee state protection. Many of the problems are often ignored because they aren't seen in the public eye, and ways are created to help them. We see, for instance, that often these people work in many rural areas where they are exploited. The refugees are sitting on the fringes, and we don't really know what to do with them. And we also do different things, like beneficial treatment in the way where we sign contracts and employment, or cultural regions, and all of that. We think that is highly problematic within these migrant communities. We can see that some of the problem is with people who are illegally, and we don't even vote there. But very often there's a buy-in, because many of these illegal migrants are from the same ethnic communities or the same countries as the legal workers, so basically they still get an opt-in into that system. Why then does the legal system works? And we're granted, they also will have majority representation, or they were happy if they do. But even with minority representation, with great political power in a couple of ways. Firstly, because you can be a decisive vote breaker of a coalition government who don't have absolute majority, like for instance over the Netherlands. Secondly, because you are directly consulted in the parliamentary process. Thirdly, because quite often there are some countries, are some parties in Parliament who would like to see the beneficial towards these migrant groups, so they will try to work together with these migrant parties that now exist. So that means that then for all these reasons, the Parliament can have a voice and maybe even have a decisive vote on what then needs to be done. But moreover, because you are a political party and a political entity, you have a bigger platform on the political arena, which does into things like the fact that you can now talk to the media. Because a large problem right now is quite often there aren't really good migrant personalities that try to just their voice outside the community into the larger arena. That's a great invisibility problem, which means that these people can't really opt into the larger system, and the larger goes unignored, whether or not the problems are there, and therefore legislation isn't created among them. It is highly problematic for these people. So,
how do you believe that the rest of society will react when you give migrant workers who have no connection to the people of that state rights that the citizens of that state themselves have?
What you need to perceive, Mr. Speaker, what you need to see is that right now they already react because they already see them in the workplace and all of that. But they don't see them truly as they are, because they don't have the platform, they're providing them an opening government, so they won't work in national areas. They will actually be beneficial on that ground. But moreover, because they have the special seats, because they need to broker and also vote for legislation which doesn't affect the migrant community, they will develop a whole range of stances and are actually seen as decent citizens. What we see quite often is the reason why things like politics happen is you can't conceptualize the other because you don't know if that person is there. When the person has a recognizable voice, we can certainly see them as human beings instead of the entities that xenophobic politicians can say they are, as happened in Europe. So you need to tell me that xenophobic politicians can have free reign of any prevailing counterforce within an arena. Moreover, secondly, we think there's greater political opt-in for these communities even for longer terms. Because even if they get to vote in longer areas, they often don't opt-in right now. Because for the first few years, they have not seen the political process working for them, so they quite often become disenfranchised from the political process. And when that happens, that means that even if they get some of them get the vote, they don't opt into a later stage. Those communities don't opt into the state. And if they make oppositional narratives towards the state, because you only see them doing bad things, that means they create all things like lingering resentment, like all intentions that we think are highly problematic, not only for these migrant communities, but also for society as a whole, because people feel less safe on the streets, and that creates a downward spiral of ethnic tensions and conflict. I think it's highly problematic, and for all of those reasons, we're very, very proud to propose today.
I thank the Prime Minister for his speech, and I'd now like to welcome up the Leader of the Opposition.
So I know Karen and Don quite well. And I also know that it has
I think
government and first thought here, and I also think second thought, because you guys seem nice, that they actually want to change the world and they want to give these people a voice, they want to get better interest, and they want to get better representation for these people that are now maybe underrepresented. We in First Opposition are going to show you why this is not going to lead to the consequences they're promising you, but more importantly, it's going to lead to a marginalization of these groups, less representations, and more bad political consequences. But first, before I go into my material about why the assumption is bad, or actually what happens with reserved seats and how we see this in the world, but also why other methods of representations are better, first on the level. First on a practical level, right? Because it seems to be that, so we talked about representation per country, right? So the way I imagine it, we're in Berlin, I know like more than 150 nationalities, right? So if you say every nationality or every group get at least one seat, that means that all of a sudden the Bundestag or the I don't know how it's called, we get like an extra 150 seats, or we're taking seats away. We don't get how this specifically works. Or they say, no, it's only for those groups that have more than a certain amount of people, right? But in their plans they said guaranteed per nation. And we say if that's the case, then we're talking only a small particular group, so I'd like to get more clear on that. But more importantly, I want to react to this other point, where they said, well, the state is an artificial contract, fine. But they say, what we're now doing is giving these people an opt-in. We say, no, you're not giving them an opt-in. What you're doing is saying, hey, Somali person, hey, Moroccan person, hey, Turkish person, we're putting you in this group, and you cannot choose to opt-in in our existing political structure, right? So we're saying what you're doing is not creating an opt-in, you're creating a default option that's going to lead to bad consequences. Then they say, well, but there are all these problems, right? You don't have political influence, you get brokers. No, what you get is individuals without backing, without majority voting and support, that have no voice, become puppets, and you don't get these people as minorities in the real parties that are real brokers. We think that's problematic, right? Thank you. Then about the idea of, well, you have like a bad conceptualization of the other, and we think bad about people, right? So if you put these voices here, you get bad representation. No, what you're saying is, hey guys, you kind of hated foreigners. What we're doing is giving one seat in your elect, like representational body, and just giving them for free because we kind of like them, right? So we're talking about people that you have like bad images, you're strengthening this image. More importantly, Don in his own speech said, at this point, we don't have effective and good people that can represent these groups, right? So you already said we have a political problem in the sense we don't have enough talent. So what you're doing is putting these people that don't have the right talent in suits, strengthening the bad image he was talking about. More importantly, you take away incentives for parties to actually invest in these minority groups and invest in them to lead to better representation, right? And then, blah, 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 yes. First point, yeah, it's, I cannot read my own handwriting. First point, so we think that publication is based on the assumption that because you have the same ethnic identity, you therefore have the same interest. We think that's false, right? We say people across groups and within groups have different interests. The fact that I'm a Moroccan immigrant, people talking about me, does not mean that I politically agree with all those people. What they say, however, and that's the core of the plan, is say no, we say standing for representation. You can only represent people if you belong to that group. We think that's harmful, we think that's bad. And specifically for these groups. But more importantly, what we're saying, because we kind of buy into the problem that they say these people are not integrated in the political system. However, because we've seen in history that your first stop within the political system is actually a very dominant one and you stay there, what you're doing is creating ethnic cleavages and creating representation across ethnic lines. So you tell these people, yes, the only people that can represent you are people from your own group, therefore other people from others' group cannot represent you. More importantly, it also means that people from other groups and you yourself cannot represent others. Means that you integrate these people within the political system along ethnic lines from a top-down approach because you as a state thinks it right. We get that you think it's that way, but it's not true, right? So we think because interests are different and because creating these political cleavages is bad and because people actually think differently, this is bad, right? But what do reserved seats do, right? Because they say it leads to better representation. No, we say what it leads to is actually standing for representation, and you select people that actually don't have majority support, right? Because maybe the problem that we don't have representatives of certain groups is because huge majorities in the diaspora are going to other people which they feel are represented. So the people you're putting there are not necessarily the right. But more importantly, you create a false mandate. You get like, hello person, this is my seat. I am representing this group, I'm giving a justification of this group. We think that's bad because what you actually do is not create political competition. It's people go to these groups and say, hey, what is the thing you want? What is the thing you think we're representing? We know know what you're saying is, well, you're giving this mandate by the government and you're creating a justification. So why is it bad, right? We say it's bad because it creates less incentive for political parties to go to these groups and say, hey, what are the things that bother you? What are the things that you find important? Why? Because you're taking away this group that is not integrated in the political system, and you, by definition, put them in this default position and to say, those are the people representing you. Meaning that the major political parties like Social Democrats, Christian Democrats, no longer actively have to go to find these groups and say, hey, we want to find someone to represent the group. Before I go on, second thought.
So under the current status quo, these people have zero representation until they're naturalized. How is the OG's case not, accentuating their problems?
So one, we say that's not true because we actually see representative minority groups and we see them across a lot of countries, so we think that's false. Two, we say the consequences of this plan, and if you want more representation, what you're doing is taking away incentives for parties to include these people. And why is it important that parties do it? Because then you get internal discourse, right? Then you get people across the aisle with different minority groups. The entire idea that people from a certain country think the same is wrong. You might have people from a specific group, we're actually so different, which means that we can fight stuff. They are no longer in the majority parties, and you no longer have those people integrated, and we think that's really bad. So we also see this in the US, right, with gerrymandering and like black districts, where black people can only represent black people and have like majority support, but more importantly, these people are not taken seriously because the only reason they have a vote is because the state gave it to them, right? So we think if you want representation, you have to create an incentive for parties to go to these groups, invest in them, and create political capital, and actually get representation in the right way. What you get in this plan, the consequence of this plan is political cleavages along ethnic lines. It means lesser representation, voices that are heard but actually fake, and a false sense of security. We ask you to vote first opposition.
I thank the Leader of Opposition for his speech. I now to call upon the Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we think that opposition is showing you a false dichotomy in this debate, because we think that at the current status, those people have absolutely no vote until they are naturalized. Then they can mostly say, but we want them to opt in into a political party system. We want them to opt in into that system right from the moment they enter our country. We don't want to wait 10 years. They need to tell you why on a comparative it is better not to have those people have a voice for the first 10 years when they live in this country than to have them be represented by someone else from the country they come from. In my speech, I'm going to talk about three things. We're going to talk about societal engagement. We're going to do that on two levels. We're going to talk about societal level and a political level. We're going to talk about refugees, and I'm going to talk about why we think that doing this on cultural lines, especially on the short term, is the best option, given that those people, often when they're new to a country, seek for the safety of the people from their own group, from the people and cultures that they are already used to, because we believe that moving to another country is incredibly hard. But first, I have 2 points of rebuttal. Senna horribly misrepresented Dan's point about what this is going to do to talent, because we never said that we think that those people don't have political talent. We think they do. But we think that under the current system, there is not enough of a narrative and a metric for them to show that they have this political talent. We think that our system at least allows them to show up that they are capable of engaging within our political system, which doesn't happen in the status quo. Then they tell you, well, but now existing parties will no longer have an incentive to try and engage with people that come from other countries. We think that that isn't necessarily consistent with her other claim of telling us some people that come from a certain country just don't feel represented from other people that come from that country because they might have other political influences. If they have other political influences, then they need to explain to us why they will still not opt into the already existing party structures. We think that they will, and given that they will, we want to make them better engaged and more able political actors within the spectrum, so later on their voice is a better voice than that it is now. Why is this going to lead to societal engagement? What we often see is when those people come into other countries, they click together with people from their own cultures, their own religions, and their own backgrounds. What does that lead to? We often see that they don't have representative role models in the current existing government. Why is it problematic? It is problematic insofar that it creates the narrative that the government is not there to represent them. We think that it first of all creates a disengagement from the political debate, especially since those people can often not vote and opt into the political spectrum unless they are naturalized, which will most likely take them at least 10 years. But moreover, we think that it is problematic on a much smaller scale. We think that this means that those people often don't take advantage of the benefits that exist for them and are in place for them. They often don't get all the government support that is ready for them and that they are eligible for, just because there is nobody telling them that that is there. And under the status quo, tell them what is there. We don't trust the government in fully representing them. We don't opt in to that. Don't make use of all the things that we have in place for them to help them continue their life in a new country. We think that that is so you say they don't make use of all the things that are there. How can having one person representing them is going to lead to all these things you just said? We think that if one person represents them, and that's exactly what that is. It's probably your problem. But first of all, we think that there's one people representing them, and at least we're going to give them that role model they can look up to. Often we see that those groups in society have existing cultural lines in which they have existence in place in which they can have their voices heard. But moreover, we will see happening in the status quo. What does do? That makes their position in society a much more visible position. Then we have the opposition. Well, but what is the rest of society going to think of it? We think that the people of the rest of society that don't like those criminals already don't like them in the status quo. Well, we think that the rest of society is now more likely to opt in with them, exactly because they can see that those people are capable of doing something right from the moment they enter that country. That they don't have to hide away and prove themselves for 10 years because we think that that is what is marginalizing those people in society. Then about refugees, we think that if you look at, like, for example, the Rwanda genocide, when a lot of Burundi people moved to Tanzania, there was a huge problem with, like, facilities that were created for them, but also because it creates an uncertainty of having those refugees in your country, because you never know whether they are going to leave your country or whether they are going to stay for eternity. It is problematic because it means that the existing political discourse is not engaging with the refugees and therefore not bettering their lives to the extent that they could. We think that under our model, that problem is going to be solved, at least on the short term, and it's going to make it better. Why do we then think that we can do this on country lines? We think that, as I already told you, those people, when they move to your country, it is often because we either hire them as guest workers, like a lot of European states did in the 1960s, or they come to us because wars break out, or because of other conflict existing in their own home country. What does that mean? Often those people come in bigger groups. Those groups relate to each other, and those groups won't, like, initially stick together because they have to opt into a new culture, learn a new language, which is really hard to engage with the state. We think because of that, it's especially on the, like, between the moment until they are nationalized, a very good idea to give them one representative that can form the bridge between them, the political system, and the rest of society. Because ultimately we believe everyone's going to be better off. I'm very proud to propose this motion.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his speech. I now like to welcome up the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
You get it back. It's fine. The problem we get in proposition is that some voices are not heard enough in our political system. We think that the marginal influences from having a few seats, having no real bargaining power, not being allowed into coalitions, creating divides between these different groups at the groups and at entrenching them as a second-class citizens who will never be part of a real political system. We think it doesn't help them. We think we should see that when they're here for a longer period of time, more than election cycles, they're citizens, they should be able to join normal parties because they have normal political interests like all other people. They should get a normal vote. Moreover, we think proposition has never shown us that where you were born 18 or more years ago means that your interests are still dictated by that particular country. Moreover, we think that you cannot lobby for those interests if you are divided between all the different countries where these people might come from. Okay, what will I talk about? I will talk about foreigners, citizens, and representation, and why we think everybody at some point in their ancestry is a foreigner. And secondly, I'm going to talk about foreigner issues. How should we deal with them? How should we integrate them? And what are the consequences of this plan? But before I do that, a little bit more rebuttal, right? Because we think that where they tell us that they currently have zero representation till they're naturalized is just not true. In the Netherlands, if you have a permit to stay for a longer time, you already have the ability to vote. As soon as you're registered, regardless of being naturalized, you already can vote in municipalities and in city councils. And we think that in countries where they shouldn't do this, they should do this, but it should be a real vote, not a you are from this country vote, right? But moreover, we think it is not about the people who stay here for like 8 months. So like when I went on exchange to Australia for a couple of months, I also didn't get to vote in their elections, and I think that's completely fair. It's about the people who stay there for a longer period of time. Then we got this idea about, oh, but they have no role models. First of all, we think it's not that relevant in politics, it's more in being successful in society. But moreover, if you want role models for all minorities in politics, why not have a seat for the gays? Have a seat for the gingers? Have a seat for atheists? Because they're also good. We think that the ability to be represented on a political level does not necessarily tie in to being a marginal or small group on other things, right? But moreover, we think that the few representatives that they have are like sort of chosen by the government to pay off this debt, and that they don't have to put in real effort to bring social and public groups to these people. We think that is particularly pernicious. So, first point that we're going to talk about, foreigners, citizens, and representation, because we think most countries are put together and consist of foreigners at some point in time. Historically, they all have to become largely part of that society, really. And in the cases where it didn't happen properly, it is specifically because we entrenched them as less, particularly because we entrenched them as being second-class citizens, particularly because we entrenched them as having one particular seat that should represent their citizens, because they're, of course, all the same and have the same issues. And we think that is that, and it doesn't give them the value to enter into real politics and to say you are part and have interest in the real issues like normal people, right? Moreover, we think representation should mean the ability to choose between competing policies put forward by competing politicians, not vote on your birthright or birth origin and entrench that. The ability that you recognize that others can represent your interests is particularly what representative democracy is, right? It means that foreigners can have plurality of interests and plurality of ideological positions. It means, for instance, that if I am a foreigner and I have a job, I might have different interests than a foreigner that doesn't have a job. I might be a foreigner that is very leftist, that might have different interests than somebody who's not leftist, right? And I think it is unfair to force them to sacrifice those ideological differences just because they think you can only be heard if you say, I am from this country and therefore my interest is X. Secondly, we think that there becomes a competition between these different foreigner groups, right? We think you create animosity because they have to compete over that voice that they have. First of all, we think it is unfair because there's a difference in, for instance, how much money they have, what kind of structures they have. But secondly, we think this also skews the attention that should be given to a particular group over another group because they're better able to lobby about the interests of a particular seat. But we think even more, they are forced to show why they are different or have different interests in a particular other ethnic group, right? So we think if you look at the division between Latinos and blacks in the United States, this actually is quite problematic if you force them to create an animosity between them. We say this might as well happen between traditional Sunnis and Shiites, or forced under their plan to show their differences, right? And we think that actually hampers the ability to support policies. It emphasizes those differences, and we think that is bad, and they have to campaign on those differences. But moreover, we think that it's more pernicious because the small groups always lose out, right? And we think that they'll also be sent away from the other parties. Why? Because they no longer have an interest in that group because there's already a seat reserved for these kinds of people. You see that, for instance, if we look at the Netherlands, when we had lots of guest workers from Morocco and Turkey, actually very many of them, and after family immigration, they integrated very well. They're actually quite evenly distributed amongst the different political parties. What you do with this policy is suddenly pull those people back out of the other political venues they have engaged in within their lives and say, oh, you should now be back to your own party because otherwise you are betraying your inheritance, right? We think that it is a step back from real integration. I'll take second half.
All right, so who knows better about the kind of discrimination Somalis face in Netherlands, you or Somali?
We actually think that Ayaan Hirsi knows best about that, and she was part of a normal political party. So we think it doesn't stand on your side of the house. And she got able to that position without saying, I can only talk about this because I'm Somali, well, because she was an excellent politician. Right. Now on particular foreigner issues, because we think there are a few issues that affect foreigners more. Like, for instance, integration. For instance, particular issues on segregation in particular. I'm saying we make it more problematic. Why? Because you force parties represent them to take responsibility for those particular problems. We don't think they can do that because of the diversity between those different groups. Secondly, we think that you make it impossible for them to actually represent the plurality of groups proportionally. Moreover, we think that the problem is in the relation of that group with the group itself. So putting it itself together doesn't solve their interaction with the wider society, it segregates them even more. So they don't solve the problems. Moreover, we think they will lose legitimacy at the point where they are shown to not be able to have enough seats to be taken into account for forming coalitions, for forming stronger lobby groups. So we think that they'll feel sidelined even more. Now, secondly, it segregates them more because you create these one-issue parties in parliament. So we have a party for the animals, right? We have one in Holland. And you entrench them as a one-issue party, and you sideline them in negotiations, but you also entrench them more in a particular cultural identity of that party, which makes it harder to actually become a part of wider society or lose a particular identity as a foreigner. We think you skew the political climate, where you force extreme righters, you give them sort of a punching back in this, and you take away the other parties who might be interested in taking it up for particular foreigner groups, just because there's no interest no longer in getting these groups. So we think you make it harder for them to become part of a real political climate. For all these reasons, we are very, very happy to oppose.
I thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition for his speech, and I now call upon the Member of Government.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the problem with the status quo is that these foreigners are excluded from any and all political discourse. Why so? Number one, they constitute as minorities in each and every constituency, so there is no specific need for current political parties to cater to these minorities. But even if we assume that these people form majorities in certain small constituencies, guess how many votes they have under the current status quo? None. This is the problem that makes foreigners living in another country inherently different from ethnic minorities who are citizens of that country, in the sense that foreigners have absolutely zero representation under the current status quo. What happens then? Their unique needs are not catered. What kind of unique needs do they have? The idea of school boards, city councils, immigration policies, all those needs that are unique to a Bangladeshi immigrant in Britain as opposed to a British naturalized Bangladeshi. And we think this exacerbates the problem of the first generation immigrant who are fresh off the boat. And we think when these problems exacerbate, these first fresh off the boat immigrants become more entrenched in the kind of problems that they have. They become poorer, they become more marginalized, and as they become more marginalized, the kind of political system that we live in tends to disenfranchise them even more. There is a clear problem with the status quo. Our solution is a top-down approach that helps broadly direct local governments take foreigner-friendly decisions in order to include them into the current status quo. A quick couple of points of refutation before I delve into my constructive. Opening opposition believes that we are forcefully excluding these people politically without sufficient analysis why. We tell you that the Somali lady who was elected in Netherlands presumably was a Somali woman of Somali origin, but a Dutch citizen. We tell you on first count, Somali origin Dutch citizen is inherently different from a Somali person who is still a Somali citizen living in Netherlands. And if it's any other thing, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the example. But more importantly, the idea of representation for themselves on ethnic lines, we completely disagree with it, which is why we're not talking about ethnic lines, we're talking about nationality lines. We're talking not about Gujaratis in Britain or Punjabis in Britain, we're talking about Indians in Britain. And we think that when these groups of people come together within their internal caucus, like the Bangladesh caucus or the Australian caucus or the Canadian caucus at Worlds, when they come together and they hold internal discussions about what they think is best for the community that they come from, because guess what? They have been immigrants for a maximum number of 10 years before they naturalize. So they have still roots back to their own country of origin. They have similar culture, they have similar norms, they have similar problems of assimilation and acclimatization. Therefore, we think they have a collective importance in the society. Kind of skewed political discourse does not really make sense, because we believe that this minority candidate that gets representation into the parliament can go through election. You can have a microcosm of democracy within the minority community, thereby have all the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, so on and so forth, which minority candidates for these people, problem solved. My constructives involve, let's see, right. So the idea of foreigners and how they are uniquely different from ethnic minorities. See, the foreigners do not have this wishy-washy social contract that you sign in when you are born. They have an express written contract when they sign their visa paper or when they show up at your border and sign an entry form and cross into your border as a refugee. We think this provides for a real and tangible contract. What does this contract entail from foreigners? This entails that these foreigners will abide by your laws, from traffic lights to abandoning the vigilante justice that you're used to in your own country. What kind of contributions do you bring to this society? If you're a tourist or a businessman for maybe 4 or 5 days, you spend a shit ton of money that you would otherwise not have done in your own country. We think this kind of expenditure that you do, I mean, a bottle of water is €1. We think this kind of spending that happens in your own country has positive effect in your own economy. We think this is positive, tangible contribution. Even for students, they pay extra tuition compared to the local student. We think this is extra contribution to the economy. But if the students are a scholarship, we think the students bringing talent to the society that society endorses and needs. So these people, even living on a temporary basis, have certain contributions to the society that we cannot deny. When these people Thank you. The principle that we're trying to talk about here is that they require reward for the conformity to the society. What is the problem? They have no volume in the society, and they are further marginalized because of the residual hostility in the society, because A, of the natural predilection against aliens, and B, because they themselves are aliens. They come from an alien culture and they have not assimilated yet. That's an inherent problem with the status quo. I will take opening.
So if we have to create an opt-in for this group, do we then choose the social construct, the random social construct of first prop, or preference, political preference, and integrate them in the existing political structures?
I don't see the mutual exclusivity of the problem. The moment you are a foreign citizen, you opt into the system of OG. The moment you become a citizen of Netherlands, you become a citizen of Netherlands and you vote according to your own constituency. In Netherlands, we see no problem with that. We want this person who's fresh off the boat, whose needs are inherently different from the other ethnicities within the same country, need to be prioritized and need to be taken into account. How are we facilitating assimilation and integration? We're forcing national politics upon these people, as opposed to praying to good Lord that these parties go to these ethnic minorities and foreigners. We're forcing the parties to go to these foreigners and make sure their voices are heard. We're having a microcosm of democracy, which means they can elect their own representative and they can be discourse about the problems of your own internal community within the said land. You can have a consensus. We think that you can better, that a foreign Muslim can understand his problems of discrimination within a foreign country better than, you know, your naturalized citizens who already receive certain facilities from the society. The idea that we're trying to talk about is the ownership of social decisions. The moment your representative exists in the parliament and a bill is passed, what happens? You take ownership of that decision. Why is this important? Because it encourages you to conform to that said decision. When that representative stands in the parliament and says, I, the representative of Somalis in Britain, do hereby assent to this bill, this means Somalis all around Britain will tend to assent to that bill. The idea of Rushnara Ali and Sadiq Khan being Bangladeshi and Pakistani origin British citizens who are MPs in the House of Commons, the problem with them representing Bangladeshi immigrants is the fact that they cannot defend the Bengali cause or the Pakistani cause. They need to defend the British cause because at heart they are British citizens. We tell you this problem of representation is inherently different. These people care about Britain's status in the EU or the North Sea oil reserves, something that immigrants do not really care about. They care about perhaps food stamps or something else. What we're essentially telling you is that foreigners are inherently different from the kind of ethnic minorities that exist within your country. They deserve special consideration. We're including them the moment they get off the boat into our borders. We should win. Joy Bangladesh.
I thank the Member of Government for his speech, and I'd then like to welcome the Member of the Opposition.
Als soms eraan nog niet gegeven, kunnen we nog meestal geven. Ja, deze is belangrijk.
Ladies and gentlemen, people watching at home, hi Mom. Respected panel, Mr. Chair, we're very happy to be here and to close this debate. What we believe on Southside opposition is that we want to create a national cohesion, so that these people will feel more at home in a state once they become citizens of this. We also believe, Mr. Speaker, that we want the people who already live in the country to accept these migrant workers, but mostly because we believe that solidarity comes from a feeling of togetherness, and we want these people to be solidary to one another. Now, my two points of extension is first of all why their proposition will worsen the political discourse and disincentivize naturalization, and why this is bad for the migrant workers, and secondly, how this will affect the perceptions in the whole country, why this will make integration far less likely. Before that, a few points of rebuttal. Now, the previous speaker has an interesting tension in this case, because he says that the migrant workers, both the ones who just come off the boat and the ones who've already been there for 2 to 3 years, do have monolithic interests, but at the moment that they get a piece of paper with a citizenship on it, they suddenly no longer have this common interest. And now, furthermore, on the entire side of the proposition, they fail to show us why nationality is a determining factor in what someone's interest is. Why is one Iraqi party something good when Iraq has Kurds and Sunnis and Shiites, and why is one Lebanese party good? They fail to show us why this metric is necessarily good. Also, is to take something off the table that has been said here all along. It doesn't take 10 years to get naturalized into Western liberal democracies. It takes between 3 and 5 years. We would like it very much to be shortened on our side of the house. We do believe that naturalization is the right metric by which to go. Now, basically, furthermore, the entire line of side proposition is essentially the no taxation without representation line that's been said in different versions by different consecutive speakers. What we believe is that yes, as the previous speaker said, they do sign a contract when they get here. There's a real list that they're not going to be represented. There are alternatives to this, which I will show you in my first point, and it creates a false consciousness for them, which I will also get to in my first point, which I'll get to now. So, first of all, my first subpoint in this is why it resonates with political discourse. In representative democracies, we want politicians to think long term. One of the issues that we find problematic in these politics is when politicians think in too populist ways. Now, why is this going to make that more likely? Because what makes these people different? These migrant workers are not necessarily here to stay. How do we know this? Because they tend to send money out of the system, and they still feel attached to the other society, just like every speaker we have said, they tend to cluster up with people from the other society. Now we want them to become part of our society and part of our national discourse, because again, as I've said, this increases the feeling of solidarity and togetherness. So we already have, so we want to incentivize changing that. So at the moment, they don't necessarily have a vested interest in long-term running of the state, but only their sectoral interests. So once they've proved their intent to stay, they can apply for naturalization. We want them to do so. Now, why do we think that this measure is going to disincentivize naturalization? Because it gives them the feeling that they can get influence into the state without fully opting into the state by naturalizing. But this doesn't give them any true change because of the factitious nature of these different 115 nations going against each other, and the fact that again these people have monolithic interests in the first place because they're all individuals, just like everyone else in society. So now, and they can still get kicked out of the countries that they're staying in on normal terms, but it gives them the feeling that they still have that they can still get in. So this reduces the incentive to naturalize. And why is this bad? Because at the moment, political parties have an incentive not just because of what first opening up brought you to get involved, but also because they know that the moment people do get naturalized, sit down. So the moment that they do get naturalized, they will need to choose a political party, and so that at the moment these political parties have an interest in working for them, especially also because they're being lobbied by NGOs like International Organization for Migration. The these people already blocked into the fact that you only can choose by what is good for in your ethnic identity. It doesn't incentivize parties to work for them. And we think this is bad closing.
Nonsense from the minority representation in the parliament can already be filtered out by the regular members. the kind of substance that they will bring in that's important, that will be debated and discussed. Isn't that a good filter system?
Okay, but these things are already being discussed in the status quo. Migrant worker rights are already being discussed. So I understand the question. So on to my second point, the perceptions. Now, at the moment, in many societies, there is already a very antagonistic perception of foreigners. There's a feeling of they took our jobs, which I think is false, but it's still a perception that exists in these societies. There's a different culture. They behave differently. There are already government measures to try and increase social cohesion, and this goes against it. And why? Because it creates the perception that these people are so inherently different, that they have needs that need specific seats, which is not something that's done for any other sector in society. Now, so that cannot be followed normally, that they deserve special treatment. So also because it gives this first impression of nationalistic interests, all Iraqis are the same, all Kurds are the same. Well, not Kurds because they're sadly not a nation yet. But so this takes away the feeling of them being as individuals, but them being a group, and it makes a group that stands against the group that you're normally in. So this increases the us versus them mentality, especially because it seems, like Prime Minister says that they will be brokering deals and that they will have key votes and coalitionary systems. And so because of loss of version, it means that people feel they're giving up more votes than they actually do. We think that this is likely to create a backlash to other people of these societies who are already part of the country. This will reduce social cohesion. This is bad for a party post.
I thank the Member of Opposition for his speech, and I now call upon the government to conclude the debate for his side.
Just a moment.
So let me get this straight. You can go to the UN in spite of having various different ethnicities and groups within your own country, but the country gets one vote. You can come to WUDC Council despite having the same fragmentations within your country, and the country gets between 1 and 4 votes. But when it comes to a set of foreigners living inside another country, like Iraqis in UK, they are somehow unable to overcome the fragmentations within themselves and vote along the lines of the overall group's interest. We reject that notion. We think an internal caucus and a microcosm of democracy within these groups will effectively allow them to represent themselves the best they can in spite of their fragmented internal disagreements, which get rung up within the internal caucus. So what's been important in the House today? We feel the questions in the House today that are important are, 1, is there a difference between a naturalized minority citizen and a foreigner fresh off the boat? Number 2, do the foreigners contribute to the society and what do they deserve in return? Number 3, does the gradualism of political inclusion work for the, to essentially give these foreigners a meaningful representation? We think it doesn't. And number 4, will there be overriding anger from the local people at inclusion of these foreigners in this manner? So let me start off with lower opposition. You say that you want to create an internal, nationalistic state within a state. And number 3, this will harm the solidarity of the migrants with the local people. We think you're wrong on both counts. See, first understand the difference between becoming a naturalized citizen and being fresh off the boat. The moment you become a naturalized citizen, you have certain special obligations to the country, and the country takes a certain special care of you. My cousin is a British citizen. My sister is a Bangladeshi student studying in UK. My sister pays a much higher tuition than my cousin does. Why? Because citizenship implies these benefits you get, and therefore you have a stronger opt-in to the system. And not being a citizen leaves you excluded from these opt-ins and these benefits. So let me tell you. So In this manner, we think, one, I've already talked to you about the National Caucus and how, you're not essentially going to create a fragmented, pseudo opt-in to democracy, but moreover, here's why, even if there is a national interest or nationalistic interest for this ethnic group in the parliament, it's not going to be a bad thing. See, the short-termness or the ethnic interest is overridden by the scope of rational discourse. See, yes, these individual representatives might push a minority-specific agenda. They might even push agendas that might be contrary to the majority's interests. But if they are so contrary, the majority representatives in the parliament will simply vote it down. There's a check and balance mechanism that doesn't allow it to pass. But on the other hand, if they do give a rational idea that can benefit the minority without marginalizing the majority, that idea gets discussed, and the scope of discussion for this idea was not present before you introduced the system, which is why it is okay to have this representative in here, and it brings benefits to have them in here. Sit down, please. So, you want to talk about the, so this is the political discourse you're talking about. You have falsely, stated that you're essentially created a false avenue of political discourse that doesn't represent, what do you call it? The people themselves. We say that it gives you an avenue of political discourse that did not exist before. That point done. Now, number two, about the backlash of the people because they feel that their power is artificially being siphoned away. Here's the most important thing. The majority is the majority. They're never going to lose majority in the representative. So they're not going to lose real power. They're not going to somehow face a nightmare situation where their voices are no longer heard. That's one. But secondly, it is specifically because these migrants don't get representation that the majority does not even understand what they want or understand, why they act the way they do. Through the exposure of representation, you present the image to the majority, such as your Bangladeshi or Pakistani, what do you call it, MPs in UK would do, that the majority finds acceptable, and which the majority now sees incentive to include these minorities or help these minorities assimilate into them. A little bit later, I'm actually moving to you. So let's move to upper opposition. See, you've talked about how it's not going to lead to a decent representation, it's going to lead to more marginalization because you think ethnic identity is, what do you call it, has different conflicting interests, and you can't integrate along a top-down approach. We think this is wrong. We think, yes, there are cross interests, but as I've already said, you can work those interests out before, you take that representation to the vote. You can have a microcosm of democracy where individuals or different candidates compete for that national representative slot where different people with different opinions and different agendas try to sell those agendas to the entire ethnic minority and then say win their vote that way. So, and regarding how you need to bring the parties to the people and the minorities, we think parties very often conveniently leave these foreigners out because they don't see sufficient political return in engaging with them. We think this gradualism is too damn slow. I'll take lower, please.
Okay, so even if it might help out a little bit in the short run, if in the long run it hurts their integration and it pushes them away from the rest of society, how is this possibly a good idea?
Here you go. I personally do not think having a voice in the legislative really pushes you away or hurts your integration. One, it gives you more incentive to integrate, but moreover, the exposure that you get through these representatives gives more incentive and reason for the majority to and welcome your integration into them. So the benefit. So I don't think it's going to hurt their integration. So moreover, you want to talk about this false dichotomy where politicians will have to be forced to approach. We think politicians don't approach, so the best idea is to bring the representative to the politicians. That way the political parties don't have the opt-out of simply conveniently bypassing these foreigners because it doesn't have their own agenda. See, because under your model, unless you can convince these people to pursue, you perpetuate this underrepresentation continuously until they become naturalized. So there's like between 3 to 10 years of their lives where they essentially become a pariah in the state. And we think this gradualism is way too slow. So when you talk about how everybody is a foreigner and issues that foreigners will find important, here you go. Everybody might have been a foreigner once, but society tends to welcome those foreigners that are culturally similar to them and reject or be hostile or be mistrustful of those that are culturally dissimilar to them. So when you give these people a representation option, regardless of whether how society, might or might not be inclined in favor to them, we think that essentially brings them forward in a way that's better. So you don't see this mobility that you talk about in the real world where somehow, you get to, once you become a naturalized citizen, you get to have your say. Because, Bangladeshis and Pakistanis, they've been moving in the UK since the 1940s, but there's been very few ethnic representations of them into the legislation, and it's important that they have this legislation because only they in case of your Somalian example, know best the kind of challenges their group faces. So you can have both the Somali representative, and yet you can have other Somali citizens representing other parties. So you can have a greater assimilation. So this is why closing government wins this debate. We have shown you the difference between a citizen and somebody who's fresh off the boat. We have shown you why they have a contribution and why they deserve an opt-in, and we've shown you there is no harm in this opt-in, actually there's scope for rational discourse, which is why this debate should be over. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank the government whip for his speech, and now call upon the opposition whip to conclude the debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, thank you for the floor. If we on our side can prove that their policy will have both short-term and long-term harms for these immigrants, we win this debate. And therefore I will sum this debate up on two things. Firstly, how it will affect the foreigners, and thereby causing them long-term harm. Whether they become naturalized, or as we believe it's more likely they will become naturalized. And secondly, how this will affect the current citizens of the state. How this will create more tensions along nationality lines, along ethnic lines, along you and us lines. And why this will cause a more violent society, or a society that is more restrictive against migrants, and why this will cause a short-term harm. So what we see, what we will show you today is that this policy is bad all around. Okay, so firstly, my rebuttal will be integrated into my points. I'll flag that when it comes up. So firstly, how will this affect the foreign workers, and why will this lead to long-term harm? Now, while some might believe that the people of government are good people, I tend to disagree. I think that they might even be horrible people who want to trap these foreigners into a place where we can basically use them as labor by creating a false consciousness, but them not wanting citizenship because we give them tidbits of us. But whereas we can throw them out and exploit them as we please. No, thank you. Now, how does this work? Now, I want to bring you this idea that we create a false consciousness, that they have a false vote that doesn't really count. Now, government comes up here and says that, well, we're going to give them more influence. That's what we want. We want them to be able to influence into their own daily life. Now, first government says that already most countries do give them rights in their municipal countries. But what alone brings you, which is the extra harm that actually comes for this, is that we say that these parties will not really have the full power, because firstly they will be plagued by infighting, and I'll show later what will happen even if they're not plagued by infighting. So they will not represent a unified group, because these parties don't represent a monolithic group. Secondly, when you have single party lines, they can easily be sidetracked. What we can see in several parties in Europe right now, in several parliaments in Europe right now, where you have many coalition systems and where you have representative democracies, is that if there's a party that isn't in your line with what you want, you don't speak to them at all. You don't need to consult them, because these people are not in line with what you said. And then we have this idea that comes out of second government, saying that, well, if we listen to what they say, even let's say that they come up with a crazy notion, we just won't implement it. Now I'm going to go to note that my second about how this causes backlash. But what we see here is that many of these immigrants come from countries with shaky democratic bases. So we are unsure how a representative system works. So what we see is that they believe that they get an extra influence, that they believe that they get a vote that actually matters, that they get to put a motion, that they get to accede to something. Now, while they might, as they said, get ownership of this, of some of these votes, that only creates a false consciousness that they have the ability to influence because they could agree with one vote. The odds of them getting a vote in against something that the majority of society doesn't want is very, very tiny. So they'll basically be sidelined and relegated to only play a second fiddle to other parties. So we see here that they do not actually gain any increased legitimacy. They do not get increased influence. But what we see is that they get the illusion of influence. And now, what happens when you have the illusion of influence? Now, what we see here is that you push less for more rights, because you think that you've already been given rights. So under status quo, people push for naturalization, to become a citizen, because that actually gives you a bigger ability to influence, because it gives you more right. Now, what we see here is that they've already been given what is the surface rights. The surface rights that we see as citizens is that we have the ability to vote. So we see is that they have no increased reason to push for more rights, because they think that we are right. But at the same time, we as a state have the ability to push them out of our country. We can still charge them higher for education as they bring up. So you see that these are not issues that will help them. I will take opening.
So, under the opening opposition counter model, you opt in immediately to national elections. You have no guarantee you will actually be represented by people you don't know and the language you don't speak. Only in our world we have guaranteed representation by someone you can trust, and when we finally
thank you.
System.
Well, firstly, that wasn't really a counter drop. It was more like this is the reality that we live in most countries. Secondly, what we say is that these members won't necessarily represent you fully. Firstly, the fact that they're from your nation doesn't mean that they know what you need. Just like we don't have restored seat for special socio-economic people of our country. We don't think that, or special ethnicities within our country, we don't think that these people are necessarily better represented by them. And we don't think that it's necessarily automatically. It's someone who has usually not only work visa, but some form of residence permit as well. And then second one comes here and says that this will actually help integration, because they learn how to work within the parliamentary system. But what we do now, what the non-Spain team, this will actually hurt integration. Why? Because this will create a dual parliamentary system. Because under the logic used by secondary government, is that they first deal with all the issues within their internal caucus. Now, when they deal with this internal caucus, they see that they first need to rely on themselves. Now, if they then, despite of everything we said, actually push for naturalization and become naturalized, they know that these are the people they're actually used to working with. And then you have one representative who deals with everybody else. So you won't have the same trickle-down effect. They'll rather see that the only people that can represent me are the people that are like me. So you see that even if they do become citizens, they'll never fully integrate. We see that this has led to vast problems within our society. And I'm going to get into that in my second problem. Now, how does this short-term problem? Now, the second government misunderstood us when they said that, well, they don't give up any real power. What we say is that they don't have to give up any real power. They have to feel that they give up any real power. Now, what we see is that, as someone brings you, is that they feel that another group is given special treatment. They're given preferential treatment because they and only they are given a guaranteed seat in parliament. They can never fall out of parliament. A Somali or Pakistani or Bangladesh will always be present in parliament. So even if they have less ability to influence, they still have a right above any other state. Now, I want to show you that when you have ideas that only represent these foreigners, you'll see that they are less part of our society. We have less of a common goal. That means that we as citizens feel less beholden to them. Now, this gives the right, the ability for a countervailing vote. Now, saying normal citizens feel, whoa, we have a big threat to our society. They're trying to Islamify our country, as we see people saying in Europe. And then they're trying to change the way our moral basis. So we see that they don't vote for extremist parties. And we've seen throughout Europe that when extremist power rises, then violence against immigrants also rises. So we see, and you get generally tougher legislation against immigrants. So you see that we show in long term that they will not push for the full rights. Secondly, we show you that the rights are more likely to be decreased short term, as well as violence against immigrants will increase short term. And for these reasons, we beg you for applause. Thank you very much.
I thank the opposition for his speech, and I'd like to congratulate all 8 debaters once again on what was a truly terrific debate.
I'd like, however, to ask the 8 debaters to remain on the stage as there's to be the presentation of the so-called Darling of the Audience Award.
And I believe the moderator is about to come on to present it.
All right. Thank you very much. Yes, as I told you before the debate, your job isn't done yet just by listening. You also have to decide now. So we're going to see who you believe was the best speaker of this ESL final. And we're going to do that by basically holding out those leaflets we passed out. Now, I'm not very good at counting, at least not anymore, so I need some help up here to count the votes, or at least see who's got the most. Sorry. So I'm going to ask that guy, the convener, Patrick Ehmann, the boss of it all, to come on stage and help me and see who's going to win this Darling of the Audience award. So, it's a very easy process. You've got a leaflet, and if you don't have one, use your hand, and we're going to see who gets the most vote. We had, as the first speaker of the debate, we had here from Leiden A, Dan Welling. Dan, will you please stand up? It's not. All right, your decision. You want to just applaud, that's fine too. So that was the applause for Dan. Thank you very much, Dan. Then we had a second speaker here on the other side from Leiden C. We had Senna Motong. Matu. Sorry. All right, coming back to the opening government there, we had Karen Merkens. Thank you very much. Then from Leiden C, the second speaker was Roger Bauer. Coming to the second half of the debate, we had in closing government from Bangladesh A, Ratib Madrisa Ali. Shall I continue? I shall continue, I think. Then we had in closing opposition from RRISA from Israel, Alan van Dam. Well, it seems like he's got his fans here too. The closing speaker on the government side, once again from Bangladesh, was Akib Farhan Hussain. And then finally, the last speaker of this debate, once again, from Israel, Ben Blatnikov. All right, just, I think we have reached a decision, Patrick and I. And the winner of the award, the darling of the audience, is from BRAC, Bangladesh A, Ratib Madrisa Ali. Congratulations again, and thank you very much for this excellent ESL final debate. Now there will be a very, very, very short break, hopefully, because you know, we have to keep a schedule here. After that, we're going to hear the open final. The open final is those of the native speakers, and we're glad that the members of the public want to stay. They're very welcome to stay. I do have a disappointment, though, at this point. For those that want to leave at this point or even want to leave after the next debate, you're not actually going to get any results here. These adjudicators here take a lot longer to decide than you do. There are 9 of them or so, and they have 18 opinions amongst them, so they're going to take all night trying to decide when we are not going to get a result and until late at night. If you want to know the result, I ask you to check our website, WUDCberlin.com, and you'll get the result there. That's it for now. There will be a very short break now, and then we'll continue with the open final. Thank you.